His name is Pete Drake. He got the brilliant idea one time to make his steel guitar talk, and he actually does it right now with a beautiful song, Forever. Pete Drake.
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, Melody Motel. Before we begin, I'd like to explain a bit about who I am and what you can expect from this podcast. My name is Lane Hewitt. I'm 42 years old, I live in Indiana, I have a wife and an 11-year-old daughter, and I'm a lifelong music fan. I've done some fanzine writing, some radio, and some podcasting. By day and often by night, I'm a high school English teacher. I'm not looking to conquer the world with this podcast. As I've told my wife and my friends, I just want to make something and have fun. Some guys work on old cars. Some guys put tiny ships into bottles. I love music, and I want to share some with you, plus a little of my own perspective. Honestly, I'm not sure yet what forms that might take. You'll have to keep listening to find out. Why is the show called Melody Motel? Mostly because it's a cool name, but I guess it goes a bit deeper than that. Obviously, I'm a big fan of melody. More than lyrics, more than guitar solos, that's probably what I notice first about any music I hear. And motel? Well, I've always loved motels. The stiff carpet, the weird air conditioner smell, the little bars of soap, the burnt coffee in the lobby. But mostly I love the feeling of going somewhere, getting away from the familiar and heading for a new experience. Hopefully this show gives you a little bit of that feeling. Now we begin episode 1, an introduction to one of my favorite bands, Grant Lee Buffalo. I'm glad you're here with me in the Melody Motel. I first encountered Grant Lee Buffalo on their second album, 1994's Mighty Joe Moon. I was a sophomore in college and a DJ on the campus radio station. This was fun, but not quite the free-form college radio experience a lot of people describe, where they just play whatever they want. Some ambitious upperclassmen had taken over our station and designed it to compete with the local radio stations, the local commercial stations. This meant playing Green Day's Basket Case every 2 hours, all day, every day, like it or not. However, the real silver lining to this experience was the wealth of mystery and riches to be found in the promo closet. The closet held mammoth stacks of promo CDs from record labels all over the world, and any music that didn't quite fit the format or that the program director hadn't heard of landed here and generally stayed here. Were we supposed to even open this closet? Of course not. Did I open it every time I did a show and take whatever I wanted? Absolutely. I rescued Grant Lee Buffalo's second album, 1994's Mighty Joe Moon, from the scrap heap and never looked back. The first single from the record was a late addition to the track list called Mockingbirds. Lyrically, the song is based on frontman Grant Lee Phillips losing his home in the California desert to the 1994 earthquake known as the Northridge earthquake. It's a majestic, fatalistic song about feeling devastated, overwhelmed, and overthrown, and the nagging feeling that however good you might feel on a given day, disaster is waiting around the corner.
Devastation at last, finally we meet. After all of these years out here in the street, I had a feeling you would make yourself known. You came along just to claim your place on the throne. Now I have been overthrown, overthrown. And I thought if I do the right lines, but these mocking words won't let me shine.
I've been obsessed with a lot of music in my life, but maybe never to the level that I was obsessed with Grant Lee Buffalo during the years of 1994 to about 1997. My friends could readily vouch for this because I would not shut up about this band and evangelized about them to everyone in earshot. The music on Mighty Joe Moon, and for that matter the artwork, which was important to projecting the group's unique aesthetic, was accessible and familiar in an I swear I've heard this song before but can't place it kind of way, but grounded in an eerie wellspring of battered Americana, like a haunted frontier junk shop. I once heard the band's sound described as prairie glam, which may owe to the fact that one of their most popular early songs, Jupiter and Teardrop, sounds quite a bit like Bowie's Moon Age Daydream. But overall, that's not a bad label. Whatever the case, I couldn't get enough, and it has to be said that at this time we were in the last days of the pre-internet era. Sure, we had email, message boards, and a few websites to look at, but for the most part, information about relatively obscure groups was scarce. So the thing to do was listen to the album on repeat, stare at the CD booklet, and dream. Mighty Joe Moon was also the perfect soundtrack for road trips, namely the completely insane journey my friend Jason and I took to Colorado, where we made it our mission to show up unannounced at Hunter S. Thompson's house. For me, Lone Star Song is the sound of that trip.
There's a bullet in the heart tonight, in the heart of Texas. They shout it to them out of sight. We are rolling home. They shot an angel in mid-flight, and now she won't protect us. They shout it to the bandit nights. We are west, we're home. Like in the films of Hollywood, and the angels are descending like a rush at selling. Would before too long sing a Lone Star song.
Seeing Grant Lee Buffalo live on the tour for Mighty Joe Moon at Bogart's in Cincinnati is one of the most cherished memories I have at this time period. As I said before, the internet was in its infancy, and I couldn't browse dozens of YouTube clips before the show to see how the band looked and sounded live. Side note, you can't do that now, so if you're interested in hearing how they sound live, you can go to YouTube and see all kinds of things. But anyway, to my amazement, they sounded massive, especially for a trio. Brantley Phillips, the group's singer, guitarist, and main songwriter, did something I had never seen anyone do, which was play a 12-string acoustic through a fuzz box, dynamically switching back and forth between clean and distorted tones in the same song. Paul Kimball, on bass, keyboards, and falsetto harmonies, manhandled his bass guitar like it owed him money. More than once, I emulated his intensity while listening to the album at home and injured myself. I even hit my head on my own knee. Drummer Joey Peters, who had previously played with Cracker, was obviously a great musician and just fun to look at with his corkscrew hair and long arrow-shaped face, like a silent film actor. So you might say this concert had a lasting effect on me. Every song was note perfect, even better than the record, and my fixation on the band grew. They never had a big hit per se, but were critically acclaimed and opened for bands like REM and Pearl Jam, so their future seemed bright. It wasn't really, but I'll get back to that in a moment. By the time I went to that live show, I had dug up the band's debut album from 1993, Fuzzy. Though it sounds a little underproduced next to Mighty Joe Moon's reverb-heavy atmospheric majesty, it's a brilliant album that defines the band's sound. The opening track, The Shining Hour, shows off Grant Lee Phillips' densely textured lyrics, referencing trumpet solos, John Wilkes Booth, 19th century Civil War swords, King Tut, Al Capone, and Ouija boards, all in the same song. To follow up Mighty Joe Moon, the band released Copperopolis in 1996. Probably the only album I had ever anticipated this much up to that point was Megadeth's Countdown to Extinction, but not at the psychotic level at which I awaited Copperopolis. At that time, Luna Music, a record store in Indianapolis that still exists today, albeit in a different location, had a listening station loaded with promo CDs of upcoming releases. When I discovered that they had an advanced copy of Copperopolis, I started making any excuse to drive from wherever I happened to be to Luna to listen to the record. Then I went to work using my meager college newspaper and radio credentials to finagle an advanced copy of the album for myself. I must have been persistent enough to convince the promotional department at Reprise Records that my glowing review in the Franklin College campus newspaper would be just the thing to put the band over the top at last, because the CD eventually arrived in my parents' mailbox like manna from heaven. At first, Copperopolis was a slight letdown, though to be fair, my expectations were so sky-high that nothing could have completely satisfied me. It's a longer, more subtle record with less of Mighty Joe Moon's sepia-toned Americana flavor and more of the silky textures of the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which Grant Lee Phillips cites as his main songwriting inspiration at the time. I listened faithfully, and it grew on me. I should also mention that Paul Kimball, the bassist, was the producer for all three of the group's records while he was in the band, and Copperopolis may be his crowning achievement. It's a real headphone album, with rich, layered textures, but plenty of space to lose yourself in. Commercially, it went nowhere, and it became clear that the band's major label days were probably numbered. Homefront, a catchy but lyrically challenging song inspired by the Oklahoma City bombing and the creeping growth of hate groups within the U.S., was the first single, and I may have heard it on the radio twice. The soul of the album seemed to reside in more ethereal tracks, like A Rousing Thunder.
Walking around barefoot, lost. Pretty soon these clouds got to clear. I know it's a lie. Rouse up thunder, I only ask it to stop. For seconds so I could coax you to talk.
There was a room